feel that a mandatory census with threats of jail time or fines is too intrusive and too coercive.
It's just a form, but it's causing a political uproar.
I find it absolutely incredible that a Canadian government would choose ignorance over information.
On News and Review today, the controversy over the census. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. Every 5 years, the federal government sends out census forms to every household in Canada. The information gathered is used to create a statistical portrait of the country to tell us not just how many we are, but also who we are and how we live. Now, some kind of census has been held in this country since Jean Talon counted the inhabitants of the colony of New France back in 1666, but this year there was a controversy.
And the third person is Peter.
There are two kinds of census questionnaires. Most Canadians receive the so-called short form with 8 basic questions, but 1 in 5 households receives a longer questionnaire, the long form census. Filling out both forms is mandatory, or was. Because in late June, Stephen Harper's Conservative government announced that starting in 2011, the mandatory long-form census would be replaced by a voluntary survey. The government claimed the longer questionnaire was too intrusive to be mandatory, but the sudden move shocked a lot of people who depended on the information it gathers. And as the CBC's Margot McDermott reported, it set off a storm of protest.
Slow progression, weight loss.
Dr. Paul Hebert is a critical care doctor at the Ottawa Hospital. His hospital relies on information it gets from the long-form census to plan health care for the surrounding community.
If we want health services to be well planned and evaluated, we need this.
Dr. Hebert has just written an editorial for the Canadian Medical Association Journal, slamming Ottawa's decision to make the long-form census voluntary.
There is a direct link between trauma care and socioeconomic status. So your position in society makes you vulnerable for trauma care. So it affects how I plan my trauma services for regions.
Legally married? Absolutely.
The long-form census comes around every 5 years. It has more than 50 questions on everything from your job to education and income. The government says privacy concerns are behind the change, although the Privacy Commissioner has received only 3 complaints in a decade.
Who feel that a mandatory census with threats of jail time or fines is too intrusive and too coercive.
But the decision has sparked an outcry from a growing number of Canadians. Everyone from economists to big city mayors to even some religious groups say they rely on the information from the long-form census.
We talked to some people who say it is a bother, but
it's inconvenient for everyone, but in the long term, I think it's better for everyone to have that information.
What's it take? 20 minutes and every few years or whatever? So it's not a big deal.
The opposition says this is all about the Conservatives' anti-government ideology.
Let's be clear, this is ideological and it touches on the most vulnerable Canadians and the federal government's ability to deliver progressive programs to help them.
Clement says the census decision is final. The Liberals want to get MPs to come back to Ottawa from their break to ask him why. Margot McDermott, CBC News, Ottawa.
Many experts and organizations said making the long-form census voluntary would compromise the quality of the data collected because many people might not bother to fill out the questionnaires. But as you just saw, the Conservatives said people shouldn't be forced to answer such personal questions. So the CBC's Melanie Nagy set out to find out what kind of questions does the census ask and how personal are they?
Sharing personal information is something Khalid Adougani and his wife Lina Yacoub do on a daily basis. But ask them to share that same information with the Canadian government and
what the government will do with these things, like for what?
I think the government will use this to serve us better.
These two are squaring off over the merits of Canada's mandatory long-term census. These questions are from 2006.
How many rooms are in your home? When was your home built?
Every 5 years, Canadians receive a census and are required to answer the questions. Questions the Conservative government now says are too intrusive. They want to make the long-form questionnaire voluntary and not subject to threats of jail time for not answering. In 2006, the census asked questions concerning personal information, such as ethnicity and income level, queries the government argues people should not be forced to answer.
Are you married, legally married, separated, divorced, widowed? Is that too personal?
No.
Tell me why.
Because I'm not ashamed of the way I'm living.
71-year-old Myrna Bello considers herself an open book. Census questions about where she lives, her education level, and where she worked simply don't bother her. But delve into how much money she makes, and her comfort level wanes.
Would you want Stats Canada to have access to your income tax?
I think maybe not.
But it's that information census supporters say is invaluable.
I don't have a problem with it.
There's not one question on the 2006 census that troubles Brian Wade. He believes the census is vital to community planning.
I think it's very useful to have and important information to have so that we can provide better services to Canadians.
The Conservative decision to scrap the mandatory long-term census was made without much public consultation, but they maintain their strong support for the move. Now that's a belief the Liberals are challenging, and they now want a parliamentary committee to look into the census debate. Melanie Nagy, CBC News, Ottawa.
But before that could happen, the controversy escalated when the head of Statistics Canada announced he was resigning. Munir Sheikh gave no reasons for his decisions, saying only, "This relates to the question of whether a voluntary survey can become a substitute for a mandatory census. It cannot." But that contradicted what Industry Minister Tony Clement had been saying.
And we chose an option that Statistics Canada said would work.
And that enraged the opposition.
I find it absolutely incredible that a Canadian government would choose ignorance over information.
We're calling on Stephen Harper to call off the attack dogs and the bully boys.
But the government refused to back down.
We should not force Canadians to answer intrusive and very personal questions.
And that set up another showdown when Clement and Sheikh both appeared before a parliamentary committee. The CBC's Melanie Nagy was there.
Bonjour. Morning, Mr. Sheikh. Heureux d'être ici, Monsieur Clement.
Industry Minister Tony Clement.
That long-form data will now be collected through this new voluntary survey, the National Household Survey.
Canada's former chief statistician, Munir Sheikh.
The quality of the information produced under a voluntary survey would be less than that under a mandatory census.
Two men at the center of Canada's mandatory long-form census debate. Today, both were called to speak before a parliamentary committee. Intrusive and coercive. That's how the minister views the long-form census. And he refuses to back down from his government's decision to scrap it.
I don't think government should be around for law-abiding Canadians to instill fear.
That consistent and unwavering position prompted this grilling from opposition MPs.
I suggest that you manufactured this crisis.
We expect that an industry minister makes his decisions based on fact, not on urban myth.
But Clement was not the only one to face tough questions.
Is it worth imprisoning Canadians in return for that data?
If the government doesn't want people to go to jail, it's not my issue.
After 38 years at the agency, Sheikh abruptly quit last week. When asked about his resignation, he became emotional.
Committed to the value and values.
But when asked about the census changes, he stood firm.
As long as we all understand that statisticians are saying that the quality of data is going to be lower.
But even with all that debate, there was little talk about a possible compromise. Today, that came from the National Statistics Council. The government-appointed advisory body, which has remained silent until now, says...
But it's time to stop simply arguing. We have to start moving towards solutions.
As the census debate continued to rage, it moved from Parliament onto the airwaves and onto the internet, as many Canadians used social media to get their messages across. Here again is CBC's Melanie Nagy.
Mel Gibson. Lindsay Lohan. Hot Twitter topics. But what about this? That tweet sounds like a bit of a sleeper, but as it turns out, the long-form mandatory census is anything but.
The census, I won't be filling out the long form.
From YouTube rants to dedicated Facebook pages, the mandatory census is getting lots of attention online, much of it in favor of keeping it.
Give us back the long-form census. Count me in.
Just this week, a song in support of the census was uploaded. It can now be found on dozens of social media sites. The census-saving jingle was John Campy's idea. Campy believes the census provides vital information and doesn't want it changed.
This is such a boneheaded decision, and when I get that apoplectic over something, I find it best to shift over into song.
Unlike Campy, Marianne Levitsky isn't much of a social media user, but when she heard the mandatory census was in jeopardy, she went online and created her very first virtual petition.
A few weeks later, it has more than 10,000 signatures, so seems like there's a lot of people who do care about this.
Then there's William Johnson. He's been cranking out comments on Twitter. Johnson wants the census scrapped, and he's been tweeting with the industry minister, telling him just that.
His followers saw what I had written, and then within the next 10 minutes, I had about 20 people from all over Canada either supporting me or against me.
I never thought that a census issue would raise that kind of passion among people.
And because of that, social media experts say politicians should take note.
Whenever there's a social media campaign raising that much clout among Canadians, if they ignore it, it's at their own peril.
But in August, while visiting the Vancouver Aquarium, Prime Minister Stephen Harper said his government would not back down. He said some people don't want to provide personal information.
I know some Canadians will have some reluctance to provide that, and I know some people think the appropriate way to deal with that is through prosecuting those individuals with fines and jail terms. This government will not do that.
In late August, the Liberals announced they would table a bill that would keep the mandatory long-form census but eliminate the penalty of jail sentences, which means that the census will continue to be a hot topic when Parliament resumes in the fall. And that's News and Review. Don't forget to check out our website at newsandreview.cbclearning.ca and, of course, our resource guide. I'm Michael Serapio. Thanks for watching. When the world's most powerful leaders met in Canada, we spent $1 billion to protect them, only to see a city descend into chaos.
We were stuck in a cell with handcuffs on us for over 15 hours. This can't be democracy, man.
On News and Review today, the G20 summit, talks and tear gas. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. In June, Canada hosted 2 summit meetings of world leaders. One was a smaller one, the so-called G8 summit. The other was the larger G20. Now, the main purpose of the 2 meetings was to agree on a plan to help countries recover from a crippling recession, but the action inside the conference centers was overshadowed by what was happening outside. Police and demonstrators clashed in the streets of Toronto. Stores were vandalized, police cars set on fire. And before it was over, more than 1,000 people were arrested, the largest wave of mass arrests in Canadian history. So what went wrong, and how could that happen in a place like Canada? Part of the problem was that although the G8 summit was held in Huntsville, a small resort that was easy to protect, the larger G20 summit was held in Toronto, and it was not. In late May, the government shocked the opposition by revealing that the summit's security costs had risen to almost $1 billion, up from the $179 million originally allocated. And as the CBC's Terry Milewski reported, security experts blame that on the decision to hold it in the heart of Canada's biggest city.
Location, location, location. This is really the reason why it is so expensive.
This security expert says putting the G20 in downtown Toronto will create a security nightmare, a summit surrounded by high-rises. Don't blame the G8 summit, which will be out of town in a resort that's easy to seal off. The problem is the G20 wouldn't fit there, so it was moved to Toronto, where every condo, every rooftop, every window will have to be secure.
So you don't need a plane anymore to have an aerial attack. You can be in one of those high-riser and you have literally a bird's view of the area. And this is where the people will be the most vulnerable.
So an army of police will be needed to check everything. Actually, two armies, one for the G8 and another for the G20. The bill for the RCMP alone will be almost $500 million.
I mean, if you spread that across every officer in the country, it works out to more than $10,000 per officer, so it doesn't make any sense.
These guys just don't know how to manage public money.
The Liberals say the budget's out of control, so does the NDP.
5 times the original amount.
But the government says it's unprecedented to have two summits back-to-back.
And we believe the experts when they say this is the necessary level of security. I understand that the Liberals don't believe in securing Canadians or the visitors here. We're different.
The Public Safety Minister denied that putting it in Toronto made things worse.
No. Would it be a good...
But the Finance Minister said yes.
I do think going forward that cost, though, is going to be a big factor about where these events are held.
Yeah.
And whether they'll be held in major cities in the world like Toronto, because there is a disruption cost.
The government defended the money spent on security, saying it was necessary, and it insisted that summit costs were under control. But 3 weeks before the summit began, there was another uproar, this time over an indoor artificial lake at the media center. Here again is the CBC's Terry Milewski.